The afternoon sun was getting low when Margaret Eleanor Hartwell walked slowly toward the big glass doors of the Riverside Community Center. Her old brown shoes made soft sounds on the concrete steps. She carried a small canvas bag that looked like it had seen many years of use. The bag held everything she owned now. 3 shirts, 1 extra pair of socks, a small blanket, and a photograph of 5 children that was yellow with age. Margaret was 96 years old. Her hair was white and thin, pulled back with a rubber band she had found on the street last week. She wore 3 shirts because the nights were getting cold and she did not have a warm coat. Her hands were wrinkled and spotted with age, but they still moved with a strange kind of grace that most people did not notice. She had been living on the streets for 8 months now. It started when there was a mistake with her pension papers, and she could not pay rent for her small apartment. The landlord was not mean, but he had bills to pay too. He gave her extra time, but the government office moved very slowly. By the time they fixed the mistake, someone else was living in her apartment. The waiting list for new apartments was very long. Margaret was too proud to ask her children for help, even if she could find them. It had been many years since they talked. The community center was warm inside. Margaret liked to come here when the weather was bad or when she needed to use the bathroom. The people who worked there were kind. They never asked too many questions or made her feel bad about her situation. Sometimes they gave her a cup of coffee or a sandwich, but they did it in a way that made her feel like a person. Not like someone to feel sorry for. Sarah Martinez was working at the front desk that day. She was a young woman with kind eyes who had worked at the community center for 3 years. She had seen Margaret come in several times over the past few weeks. Sarah always smiled and said hello, but she never pushed Margaret to talk if she did not want to. Today was different, though. Margaret did not go straight to the chairs by the window where she usually sat. Instead, she walked slowly down the hall, toward the back of the building. Her steps were careful and quiet. She stopped in front of a room with an open door. Inside the room, there was an old upright piano pushed against the far wall. The piano was brown wood with scratches on the sides. Some of the keys were yellow with age. It looked like it had not been played in a long time. There was dust on the top and a few pieces of sheet music scattered on the bench. But to Margaret, it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in months. She stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides like they were remembering something from long ago. She did not notice that Sarah had come up behind her and was watching too. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah said softly, so she would not scare the old woman. Margaret jumped a little, then turned around. Her eyes were bright and there was something different about her face. "Yes," she said in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Yes, it is very beautiful." "Do you play piano?" Sarah asked. Margaret looked back at the piano, then at Sarah. "I used to," she said. "A very long time ago," Sarah smiled. "Would you like to go in and look at it closer?" "No one really uses this room much anymore. We had a volunteer who used to give piano lessons, but she moved away last month." Margaret's eyes got wider. Could I just touch the keys? I promise I won't break anything." "Of course," Sarah said. "Take all the time you want." Margaret walked into the room very slowly. The piano seemed to get bigger as she got closer to it. She reached out one wrinkled hand and touched the top key very gently. It made a soft, clear sound that filled the quiet room. She pulled her hand back quickly, like the key was hot. But then she reached out again and pressed another key, then another. Each note was pure and sweet. The piano was old, but someone had kept it in good condition. "The bench looks sturdy," Sarah said from the doorway. "Please sit down if you want to." Margaret looked at the bench, then at Sarah. "Are you sure it's okay?" "I'm sure," Sarah said. Margaret sat down slowly on the piano bench. It was the right height. Her feet could reach the floor and her hands fell naturally onto the keys. For a moment she just sat there with her eyes closed. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and careful. Margaret's fingers moved over the keys like they were greeting old friends. She played a simple melody that Sarah did not recognize, but it was beautiful and sad at the same time. The music seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in the room. As Margaret played, her whole body changed. Her bent shoulders straightened. Her wrinkled hands moved with confidence and skill. Her face, which usually looked tired and worried, became peaceful and focused. She was not a homeless old woman anymore. She was a musician. Other people in the community center began to notice the music. Mrs. Chun, who was in the craft room making a scarf, put down her needles and listened. Tom, the janitor, stopped mopping and stood in the hallway with his head tilted toward the music room. Even the children in the after-school program got quieter, so they could hear better. Sarah watched from the doorway and felt something special was happening. This was not just an old woman playing piano. This was something much more important than that. Margaret played for about 10 minutes, then stopped. The room was very quiet. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the keys. That was beautiful, Sarah said. Really beautiful. Margaret looked up with tears in her eyes. Thank you for letting me play, she said. I haven't touched a piano in so many years. I forgot how much I missed it. You play wonderfully, Sarah said. Where did you learn? Margaret was quiet for a moment, then she said, I went to school for music when I was young, but that was a very long time ago. A lifetime ago. Sarah could tell there was much more to the story, but she did not want to push. Instead, she said, You're welcome to come and play any time we're open. The piano needs someone to care for it. Margaret stood up from the bench slowly. Thank you, she said. That's very kind. As she walked toward the door, Margaret turned back one more time to look at the piano. Something had awakened in her that had been sleeping for many years. Tomorrow, she decided, she would come back. Margaret came back to the community center the next afternoon. She walked straight to the music room without stopping to sit in her usual chair by the window. Sarah saw her come in and smiled, but she did not follow her right away. She wanted to give the old woman some privacy with the piano. Margaret sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. Yesterday she had played a simple song, something easy to remember. Today felt different. Today she wanted to play something that had been living in her heart for many years. She began with the opening notes of Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. The music started soft and dreamy like moonlight on water. Margaret's fingers moved across the keys with more confidence than yesterday. Each note was perfect and clear. The melody flowed from her hands like it had been waiting inside her all. This time, as she played, Margaret felt something she had not felt in decades. She felt like herself again. Not the tired old woman who slept in doorways and counted pennies for food. Not the mother who had worked 3 jobs and worried about bills every night. She felt like the young woman who had once believed music could change the world. The sound of the piano traveled through the community center. People began to stop what they were doing and listen. Mrs. Chun put down her craft project again. Tom, the janitor, leaned his mop against the wall and walked toward the music room. 3 teenagers who were supposed to be doing homework looked up from their books. Dr. Williams, who ran the Senior Citizens Health Program, was walking down the hall when he heard the music. He had studied piano in college before he became a doctor. He knew good playing when he heard it, and this was not just good playing. This was extraordinary playing. Sarah heard the music from the front desk and felt her heart beat faster. Yesterday, Margaret had played nicely, but today was completely different. Today the music was alive and powerful. Sarah walked quickly toward the music room to see what was happening. When she got to the doorway, she could not believe what she saw. The tired old woman from yesterday was gone. In her place was someone who looked years younger. Margaret's back was straight, her head was held high, and her hands moved over the keys like they were dancing. The music filled the room and seemed to make everything more beautiful. More people gathered in the hallway outside the music room. No one wanted to interrupt by going inside, but no one wanted to leave either. The music was too beautiful to walk away from. Margaret played the entire piece without looking at any sheet music. Every note came from her memory, and her memory was perfect. When she finished Clair de Lune, she did not stop. She moved right into another piece, then another. She played Chopin and Bach and Mozart. She played music that most people had only heard in fancy concert halls. After about 30 minutes, Margaret finally stopped playing. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then everyone who had been listening started clapping. They clapped, loud and long, and some people whistled and called out beautiful and amazing. Margaret turned around on the bench and saw all the faces looking at her. There were at least 20 people crowded in the doorway and hallway. Their faces were full of wonder and joy. For a moment, Margaret looked scared, like she might run away, but then Sarah stepped forward and started clapping again. "That was incredible," she said, with tears in her eyes. "Margaret, that was absolutely incredible." Dr. Williams came into the room. "Ma'am," he said, "I haven't heard playing like that since I went to see Vladimir Ashkenazy at Carnegie Hall 15 years ago. Where did you study music?" Margaret looked down at her hands. They were shaking now that she had stopped playing. "I went to Juilliard," she said, so quietly that people had to lean forward to hear her. "A very long time ago." The crowd got even more quiet. Juilliard was one of the most famous music schools in the world. Only the very best musicians got to study there. "I performed at Carnegie Hall too," Margaret continued, her voice still very soft. "In 1952, I was supposed to go on tour with the Philadelphia Orchestra that fall." "What happened?" asked Mrs. Chun, who had pushed her way to the front of the group. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was full of old sadness. "My husband died in an accident at the factory where he worked. I had 5 children, all under 10 years old. The youngest was only 2. I couldn't go on tour. I couldn't practice for hours every day. I couldn't do anything except take care of my babies and figure out how to keep food on the table. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Everyone was looking at Margaret with new eyes. This was not just a homeless old woman. This was someone who had given up her dreams to take care of her family. "I sold my piano," Margaret said. "It was a beautiful Steinway baby grand that my teacher helped me buy. I sold it to pay for my husband's funeral and to buy groceries for the children. I never owned another piano after that." Sarah felt tears running down her face. "But you kept playing, right? You must have kept playing somewhere." Margaret shook her head. "I gave a few lessons here and there over the years when I could find families who had pianos and could pay a little bit. But mostly I just worked. I cleaned houses and waited tables and did whatever I could to make money. The children needed shoes and school supplies and doctor visits when they got sick. There was never time for music." "What about after they grew up?" asked Tom, the janitor. "Did you go back to playing then?" Margaret's face got even sadder. "By then it had been so many years. I thought I had forgotten everything. And my children had their own lives. Good lives. They went to college and got good jobs and moved to other cities. We lost touch gradually. I didn't want to bother them with an old woman's dreams about music." Dr. Williams stepped closer. "But you didn't forget," he said. "What you just played, that was professional level playing. You may not have touched a piano in years, but your hands remember everything." Margaret looked at her wrinkled hands. "I used to practice on tabletops when I was washing dishes," she said with a small smile. "I would play entire concerts in my mind while I was working. My fingers would move like they were on real keys." "And now you're back," said Sarah. "Now you have a piano again." Margaret looked around at all the faces watching her. These people had been strangers an hour ago, but now they felt like friends. They had listened to her music and heard her story. They saw her as more than just a poor old woman. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Now I'm back." Over the next few days, Margaret came to the community center every afternoon at the same time. Word about the amazing piano player had spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started coming just to hear her play and to learn more about her incredible story. Sarah made sure Margaret always had a cup of coffee and something to eat before she played. She also brought a comfortable cushion for the piano bench and made sure the music room was always clean and ready. Margaret never asked for these things, but Sarah could see how much they meant to her. On Thursday, Margaret was playing a beautiful piece by Rachmaninoff when she noticed a young girl watching from the doorway. The girl was about 8 years old with curly black hair and big brown eyes. She had been coming to the after-school program for weeks, but she was usually shy and quiet. When Margaret finished playing, the little girl walked into the room. "My name is Rosa," she said in a small voice. "How do you make the piano sound?" "So pretty," Margaret smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen her really smile since she started coming to the center. "Hello, Rosa," she said. "The piano sounds pretty because each key has its own special voice. When you press them together in the right way, they sing together like a choir. Can you teach me?" Rosa asked. "I would love to," Margaret said. That afternoon, Margaret showed Rosa how to sit properly on the bench and how to curve her fingers. Over the keys, Rosa was a fast learner and very excited. By the end of the lesson, she could play a simple scale with both hands. Dr. Williams had been watching from the hallway. When the lesson was over, he came into the room. "Margaret," he said, "I've been thinking about what you told us the other day, about your children. Do you ever wonder where they are now?" Margaret's smile faded a little. "I think about them every day," she said. "But it's been so many years, they probably think I'm dead. Or maybe they're angry at me for not being a better mother." "I bet that's not true," said Dr. Williams gently. "I bet they would love to know where you are and that you're okay." Margaret shook her head. "I don't even know where to start looking. Robert was living in Chicago the last time I heard from him, but that was 12 years ago. Mary was in California with her husband. The twins, David and Daniel, were both in New York, working for some big company. And my youngest, Patricia, she was a teacher somewhere in Florida, but people move, they change jobs. They get married and change their names. Sarah had been listening from the doorway. "Margaret," she said, "what if we could help you find them? The internet makes it much easier to find people now." Margaret looked confused. "The internet?" Sarah realized that Margaret probably had never used a computer or learned about the internet. "It's like a big library that connects all the computers in the world," she explained. "You can search for people's names and sometimes find information about where they live or work." "I don't know," Margaret said. She looked scared. "What if they don't want to hear from me? What if I was a terrible mother and they're better off without me?" Mrs. Chun, who had been listening too, came into the room. "Margaret," she said in her kind but firm voice, "yesterday you told us that you gave up your music career to take care of your children. You sold your piano to buy food for them. You worked 3 jobs to make sure they could go to school. Does that sound like a terrible mother to you?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I tried my best," she said. "But there were so many times when I was tired and angry. So many times when I had to say no to things they wanted because we didn't have money. I used to yell sometimes when I was stressed about paying the rent or buying groceries." "All mothers do that," said Mrs. Chun. "That doesn't make you a bad mother. That makes you human." Rosa, who had been listening to the grown-ups talk, walked over to Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, "do you have pictures of your children?" Margaret reached into her canvas bag and pulled out the old yellow photograph. It showed 5 children standing in front of a Christmas tree. The oldest boy looked about 10, and the youngest girl was tiny, maybe 2 years old. They were all smiling and wearing their best clothes. "They're beautiful," said Sarah, looking at the picture. "How old would they be now?" Margaret's eyes got dreamy as she thought. Robert would be 64 now. He was born in 1961, Mary is 62. The twins are both 58. And Patricia, my baby, she's 55 now. "Do you remember their full names?" asked Dr. Williams. "Their married names if they got married." Margaret nodded. "Robert John Hartwell? He married a girl named Susan, but I don't know her last name. Mary Catherine Hartwell, but she married a man named Jim Peterson, so she might be Mary Peterson now. David Michael Hartwell and Daniel Matthew Hartwell. I don't know if they got married." "And Patricia Ann Hartwell? She married someone named Garcia, I think. Or maybe it was Gonzalez." Sarah was writing all this down on a piece of paper. "This is good information," she said. "We can start looking for them. But what if we find them and they don't want to see?" "Me?" Margaret asked again, Tom the janitor, who had been cleaning nearby and listening, came over to the group. "Margaret," he said, "I have 4 kids of my own. If my mother was missing and someone found her for me, I would be the happiest man in the world. It wouldn't matter what had happened between us or how long it had been. She's still my mother." Margaret started to cry. These were not sad tears, but scared and hopeful tears. "Do you really think they might want to see me?" "I think they've probably been looking for you too," said Sarah. Rosa climbed up on the piano bench next to Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, "will you play the pretty song again? The one that sounds like water and moonlight." Margaret wiped her tears and put her hands on the piano keys. As she began to play Claire de Lune again, more people gathered to listen. There was something different about her playing now. It still sounded beautiful and sad, but there was also something hopeful in it. While Margaret played, Sarah looked at the list of names she had written down. Tomorrow she would start searching for Margaret's children on the internet. She had a feeling that this story was just beginning, and that the best parts were still to come. The music filled the room and flowed out into the hallways of the community center. It was the sound of a mother's love, a musician's talent, and an old woman's hope all mixed together. And for everyone who heard it, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Sarah spent her weekend searching on the internet for Margaret's children. She found several people with the right names, but she wanted to be careful and make sure she had the right families before she contacted anyone. On Monday morning, she had some news for Margaret. Margaret was already at the piano when Sarah arrived at work. She had started coming earlier each day, and Tom the janitor let her in when he opened the building at 7 in the morning. Margaret liked the quiet time before other people arrived. She could play whatever she wanted without worrying about disturbing anyone. "Margaret," Sarah said excitedly, "I think I found some information about your children." Margaret's hands stopped, moving on the piano keys. "You did?" she asked, her voice shaking a little. "I found a Robert Hartwell in Chicago who works as an engineer. He's the right age, and his wife's name is Susan. I also found a Mary Peterson in California who teaches kindergarten. There's a David Hartwell in New York who works for a bank. And I found 2 different Daniel Hartwells, but one of them works with his brother David at the same company." Margaret put her hands in her lap and stared at them. "And Patricia?" "That one was harder because of the married name, but I think I found a Patricia Garcia who is a high school principal in Tampa, Florida. She's 55 and her maiden name was Hartwell." Margaret started to cry. "They're all alive," she whispered. "They're all okay, more than okay," said Sarah. "They all have good jobs and seem to be doing well." "Margaret, your children turned out wonderful. You should be proud." "What do we do now?" Margaret asked. "Well, I was thinking we could write letters to them. Or maybe make some phone calls, but only if you want to. We don't have to do anything until you're ready." Margaret was quiet for a long time. Finally she said, "I want to see them. But I'm scared they'll be ashamed of me. Look at me, Sarah. I'm a homeless old woman who sleeps in doorways. Their mother is supposed to be someone they can be proud of." Before Sarah could answer, Dr. Williams came into the music room. He was carrying a newspaper and looked very excited. "Margaret," he said, "you need to see this." He showed her the local newspaper. On the front page of the community section was a big picture of Margaret sitting at the piano. The headline said, "Hidden Talent Found at Community Center." The article told about Margaret's performances and mentioned that she had studied at Juilliard and performed at Carnegie Hall. "How did they find out about me?" Margaret asked. "Mrs. Chung called them," said Dr. Williams. "She thought people should know about your story. The reporter came by on Friday when you were teaching Rosa. He heard you play and interviewed some of the people who come to listen to you every day." Margaret read the article slowly. It said nice things about her playing and called her a remarkable woman with an extraordinary musical gift. It also mentioned that she was currently homeless and staying at the community center. "This is good," said Sarah. "Now more people will know about you," but Margaret looked worried. "What if my children see this? What if they read that their mother is homeless?" "If they see it, they'll know where to find you," said Dr. Williams gently. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A man in a nice suit came to the community center carrying flowers and asking for Margaret. His name was Mr. Johnson, and he owned several restaurants in the city. "I read about you in the newspaper," he told Margaret. "My grandmother was a piano player too, and she always said that music was the most important thing in the world. I want to help you." Mr. Johnson offered to pay for Margaret to have a small apartment near the community center. He said she could pay him back by playing piano at one of his restaurants 2 nights a week. Margaret was so surprised she didn't know what to say. "That's very kind," she finally said, "but I don't know if I'm good enough to play for paying customers." "Are you kidding?" said Mr. Johnson. "I heard you play when I came in, and you're better than any musician I've ever hired." More people came to see Margaret that week. A local music teacher brought her some new sheet music. A woman from the church down the street brought her a warm coat. The teenagers from the after-school program made her a card that said, "Thank you for the beautiful music." On Wednesday, something even more amazing happened. Sarah answered the phone at the front desk, and the person calling asked to speak to Margaret Hartwell. "This is Robert Hartwell calling from Chicago," the man said. "I think Margaret might be my mother." Sarah's heart started beating very fast. "Hold on, please," she said. She ran to the music room where Margaret was teaching Rosa a new song. "Margaret," she said, trying to stay calm, "there's a phone call for you. It's someone named Robert from Chicago." Margaret turned white. She stood up from the piano bench so fast that she almost fell down. "Robert," she whispered, "my Robert." Sarah helped her walk to the front desk. Margaret's hands were shaking so much that Sarah had to help her hold the phone. "Hello," Margaret said in a very quiet voice. "Mom," said the voice on the phone. "Mom, is that really you?" Margaret started crying so hard that she couldn't talk. Sarah took the phone and explained who she was and where they were. "I've been looking for my mother for 10 years, Robert said. "Ever since her landlord told me she had to move out and he didn't know where she went. My wife saw the newspaper article online this morning. We're flying there tomorrow." When Margaret could talk again, she told Robert how sorry she was for disappearing. But Robert just kept saying, "I'm so happy you're alive, Mom. I'm so happy we found you." After they hung up, Margaret sat in the chair by the front desk and cried happy tears. Other people in the community center gathered around her to celebrate the good news. "This is just the beginning," said Sarah. "I bet your other children will call too," and she was right. By the end of the week, Margaret had talked to all 5 of her children. They were all coming to see her as soon as they could get time off, work and buy airplane tickets. Margaret still played piano every day, but now her music sounded different. It was still beautiful, but it wasn't sad anymore. It was full of joy and hope and love. When she played now, everyone who heard it could feel that something wonderful was happening. The homeless old woman who had walked into the community center 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place was a mother who was about to see her children again, a teacher who was sharing her gift with others, and a musician who had found her way back to the music that had always lived in her heart. 6 months had passed since Margaret first walked into the Riverside Community Center and discovered the old piano in the back room. Now, on a sunny Tuesday morning, she sat at that same piano playing a gentle melody while 15 children listened. With wide eyes and big smiles, the music room had changed a lot since that first day. There were now cushioned chairs arranged in a semicircle around the piano. Colorful music posters hung on the walls, and a small bookshelf held dozens of sheet music books that people had donated. A sign on the door read, "Margaret's Music Room." In bright blue letters that Rosa had helped paint. Margaret looked different too. She wore a clean blue dress that her daughter Mary had bought for her, and her white hair was neatly styled. She lived now in a small but comfortable apartment just 2 blocks from the community center. Her children had wanted her to move in with one of them, but Margaret liked her independence. She also liked being close to the center where she spent her days. "Now, remember," Margaret said to the children, "when you play piano, you're not just pressing keys. You're telling a story with music. Each note is like a word, and when you put them together, they make beautiful sentences that people can feel in their hearts. Little Rosa, who was now Margaret's star student, raised her hand. "Mrs. Margaret, can I play the song you taught me?" For everyone. "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret said, standing up from the bench. Rosa sat down and began to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but the way Margaret had taught her to play it, with extra notes and gentle flourishes that made the simple children's song sound magical. The other children clapped when she finished. These free piano lessons had become one of the most popular programs at the community center. Margaret taught children in the mornings and adults in the evenings. She never charged money, but people often brought her small gifts or helped her with errands. She had a waiting list of students that was 3 months long. The morning lesson was finishing when Sarah came into the room with a big smile on her face. "Margaret," she said, "I have wonderful news. Channel 8 wants to do a feature story about you for their evening news program." Margaret looked nervous. Even though she had gotten used to the attention over the past few months, she still felt shy about being on television. "What would they want me to do?" she asked. "Just play piano and talk about your story," Sarah said. "They want to show people how music can change lives and bring communities together." "Can Rosa be in it too?" asked Margaret. "And some of my other students." "I'm sure they would love that," said Sarah. That afternoon, Margaret was playing her usual concert for the daily crowd of listeners when someone unexpected walked into the room. It was a young man with dark hair and kind eyes, carrying a violin case. "Excuse me," he said when Margaret finished her song. "Are you Margaret Hartwell?" "Yes, I am," Margaret said. "My name is David Chun, and I'm Mrs. Chun's grandson. I'm a professional violinist with the City Symphony Orchestra. My grandmother told me about you, and I wondered if you would like to play some duets together." Margaret's eyes lit up. It had been more than 50 years since she had played with another musician. "I would love that," she said. David opened his violin case and tuned his instrument. "Do you know any Bach?" he asked. Margaret smiled. "I know quite a bit of Bach." They started with a simple piece that both of them knew well. Margaret's piano provided the steady foundation while David's violin sang the melody above it. The music was so beautiful that people from all over the community center came running to listen. Word spread quickly about the amazing piano and violin duet, and by the end of the week, other musicians had started coming to play with Margaret. A trumpet player from the high school band came on Wednesdays. A woman who played flute joined them on Fridays. Soon, Margaret's daily concerts had become community concerts with different musicians joining her each day. The mayor of the city came to hear one of these concerts and was so impressed that she declared Margaret an official cultural ambassador for the city. She gave Margaret a beautiful certificate and a key to the city during a small ceremony at the community center. "Margaret Hartwell represents the best of our community," the mayor said to the crowd that had gathered. "She shows us that it's never too late to share our talents, and that music has the power to bring people together and make our world more beautiful." Margaret's children had all come to visit her several times over the past months. Robert and his wife Susan had driven down from Chicago 3 times. Mary and her husband Jim had flown in from California twice. The twins, David and Daniel, had taken turns visiting from New York every few weeks. And Patricia had driven up from Florida with her teenage daughter, Margaret's granddaughter, who was also learning to play piano. The family relationships that had been broken for so many years were slowly healing. Margaret's children understood now that their mother had given up her dreams to take care of them, and they were grateful instead of angry. They were also amazed and proud that she had become famous in her new community. On a warm evening in late spring, Margaret was playing a soft classical piece when she noticed an elderly man sitting in the back of the room. He looked familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had seen him before. After she finished playing, he came up to the piano. "Margaret," he said, "it's me, James Morrison. We were in the same class at Juilliard." Margaret stared at him for a moment, then her face broke into a huge smile. "Jimmy Morrison," she said, "I can't believe it's really you." James had heard about Margaret from a friend who had seen the television news story about her. He had driven 4 hours from his home in the mountains just to hear her play again. "You sound even better than you did when we were 20, he told her. "I always wondered what happened to you after you disappeared." They talked for hours about their old classmates and teachers, about the music they loved, and about the paths their lives had taken. James had become a music teacher and had spent his career helping other young musicians follow their dreams. As the evening grew late and the community center began to close, Margaret played one final song. She chose Clair de Lune, the piece that had started everything on that first day, when she sat down at the dusty piano and remembered who she really was. But now the music sounded different than it had 6 months ago. Then it had been beautiful but lonely, like moonlight on an empty lake. Now it was still beautiful, but it was warm and full of love, like moonlight on a lake surrounded by friends and family. When she finished playing, everyone in the room stood up and clapped. Margaret looked around at all the faces watching her with affection and respect. There was Sarah, who had believed in her from the very first day. There was Rosa, whose eyes still got wide with wonder every time Margaret played. There were her new musician friends, her students, and all the people who came just to listen because her music made their lives a little more beautiful. Margaret had learned something important over these past months. She had thought her story was over when she lost her apartment and ended up on the streets. But really, it was just beginning a new chapter. At 96 years old, she had found her voice again, not just in music, but in life. She had become a teacher, a performer, a friend, and most importantly, a mother and grandmother who was loved and respected by her family. The old piano that had sat silent and dusty for so long now filled the community center with music every single day. And Margaret, who had once thought she was forgotten and useless, had become the heart of a community that was richer and more joyful because of her presence. Every day was a gift, and every song was a celebration of the truth that it's never too late to come home to the thing you love most in the world.